friends, today I am back with a new video. This is going to be my March wrap up. March was a pretty good reading month for me. I'm like super surprised because February was not a good reading month, so I'm super happy that March was a lot better. I was able to read 8 books during March. That's the most I've read in quite a while. So I'm super happy I was able to read that amount. And there are some favorites in between here. So let's get on into the video. The first book I read was an ebook. This is Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. I managed to read this book within 24 hours because it was just one of those books that was kind of addicting. This follows the story of Alex. Her sister was tragically murdered and the murderer was not brought to justice. And Alex has a lot of pent-up rage and anger towards the person that killed her sister and also anyone else that she deems is bad. I found this book to be quite dark and hard-hitting and really thought-provoking. Much of the story focuses on Alex's sister and her rape and then ultimately her murder. A lot of this book also focuses on rape culture and teenage mental health. This book has a lot of angst and revenge, but also love and loss. So throughout the book we follow Alex as she makes friends for the first time in a very long time. This book is also based in a small town, which is definitely something that I can relate to. Also, the way that the subject of rape is dealt with in this book is super refreshing. It's not just spewing out facts, it's quite different from a lot of the other books that I've read about rape culture. I have to say, you know, I'm kind of apprehensive about reading YA because usually YA is filled with quite a few stereotypes and they get repetitive, they get annoying, and they get unoriginal. What this book does differently is they still have some of those stereotypes, but it's still original and it's still refreshing and it's still new and it's still, like, I could put up with some of the stereotypes in this book. Like some of the stereotypes I mentioned, Alex is kind of the girl who isn't like other girls. Even though she doesn't say it, you can tell. And then you got like the rebellious preacher's kid, and then you have the popular, good-looking, all-star athlete, and then you have the popular girl that all the guys want to get with, and all that stuff. And also there's, with every almost YA book, there's a lot of partying, there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of, well, there's some drugs in this book, and there's a lot of sex. But I think because of the subject that this book is dealing with, it does it in such a different light, but also a realistic light, which I found so refreshing. So that's what I really liked about this book. This book does have a very clear feminist message, and I would recommend it to any young woman or young man. So I ended up rating this book around 4 stars. I would probably say, I feel like sometimes books, they stick with you right after you read them, and this is one where it stuck with me after I read it for like a week, but then it wore off. Like, it's, I know this is like a lot of people's favorite book. Unfortunately, it wasn't really a favorite for me, but it was, I still really enjoyed it, so it's still probably like a 3.5 star to like a 4 star for me. The next book I read is The Lost City of the Monkey God by Douglas Preston. This is a true story and a non-fiction book. If you love history and archaeology, I definitely recommend you to read this book because this book was so addicting. Yeah, I managed to plow through this book in like 3 days. I couldn't put it down. I honestly couldn't. And the thing with this book is it doesn't feel like a non-fiction history. It feels like a thriller at some points because of, you know, the discovery in this book. It read like a thriller, it read like an adventure. It was so good. So in the beginning of this book we get the history about the lost city of the monkey god. So we basically get an oral history of the region and various European explorers who set out to find this lost city. The middle of this book takes us through how the team was able to come across the so-called monkey city in the Honduras jungle using LiDAR. So we then follow the team as they recruit archaeologists to do some ground truthing to actually see if there is structures on the ground. This book also went into detail like the controversy and the backlash that this team got from discovering the, you know, lost city of the monkey god, because a lot of archaeologists were, I wouldn't say a lot, I say some. Archaeologists are skeptical by nature, and especially when you claim to have found a legendary lost city. So a lot of them were kind of saying that it wasn't really lost because, you know, the indigenous population knew about the city, they knew it was there, but yet the archaeologists couldn't find any proof of any habitation, either recent within the last 300 years. So this city was virtually untouched for 500-ish years. Also, in the last half of this book we learn that much of the team that went to discover the lost city, which they later called the City of the Jaguar, a lot of the team came down with leishmaniasis, which is quite a... It can be quite a deadly disease. It's also a painful disease, and the treatment for it is super hard on your body. Oh my god, this book was a ride, and I read a lot of history and nonfiction, but I don't think a history or nonfiction book has had me quite as addicted as this, or I fell in love with, like, this book so much. Like, this is a favorite nonfiction history book, probably like one of my favorite books of all time kind of books. This is easily, like, hands down, probably in the first 50 pages, I knew this is gonna be a 5-star read for me. Oh god, it is so good. It's so darn good. I love this book, and to be honest, I could open this book up right now and start reading it again. That's like how much I love it. It is so good. Yeah, if you like history and nonfiction, I definitely suggest you to read this because it is so good. So the next book I read is I Am the Messenger by Marcus Zusak. This was an enjoyable read, and at times it was heartwarming and it was quite hilarious. I liked most of the characters, especially a old woman named Mila. I feel this book is more character driven than plot driven, and I'm more of a plot driven kind of person. But what I really hated about this book was how the main character, Ed, viewed his best friend Audrey. Ed and Audrey are best friends, but Ed thinks that they should be more than friends. Ed makes some moves toward Audrey, he kisses her, he imagines having sex with her. He believes that he deserves to have sex with Audrey, which is super disgusting and disturbing, and no. And somehow by the end of the book they end up dating, which is just even more disgusting. Like, men, you can't have everything. No. I know this book was written a while ago, but still, it's really gross, and I really just didn't like it. It gave me the creeps. It gave me a really bad taste. There's also another female character in this book that's like a 15. Ed's like a 20-year-old guy or something like that. And he believes, well, he finds her attractive, and she's a 15-year-old. So I thought that was kind of gross. Yeah, there's a lot of sexism in this book, and it's very blatant, and he just views women as sexual objects, which is disgusting. Basically, because of all the issues I had with this book, I gave it like a 2.5 star. I mean, Ed goes on quests in these books and tries to be like the good guy kind of thing. He solves a lot of people's problems. He does some good things for people, but like, dude, you're gross. No. I didn't like this. And this is, my sister actually recommended for me to read this book because I recommended for her to read a book that I really loved. And I did not like this book as much as she did. There's just some parts in it. It's just, no. So the next book I read is The Lightkeepers by Geni. Oh my. This book is so atmospheric and mysterious. And this is not your typical mystery. It's a slow, descriptive, and at times it's quite mundane. So this here story is set in the Farallon Islands, which is just off the coast of San Francisco. The Farallons are notoriously difficult to inhabit and get to. There's a lot of rough seas, there's a lot of bad weather. I mean, it's just a really rocky, sharp place that you don't want to be. The islands do have some inhabitants. They have many great white sharks, many fur seals, and a very large bird population, and some biologists that are on the island to study the various animal populations. So in this here story, we have a main character who's a wildlife photographer who goes to the islands to capture all the goings-ons of the animals on the island. But strange things begin to happen as one of the biologists are found dead. And as we continue, we get to see just how sinister these islands are. So when I went into this book, I was not expecting, to be honest, I don't know what I was expecting, but I didn't expect the pacing to be slow, but it was a good kind of slow. Like, it's not like a slow that you're like really bored. I was really engaged because it had that animal element, and I'm personally a nerd, and I love animals, I love the ocean, so I really liked the description of what they do on the island as biologists and stuff, but I also really loved our character's kind of background story. She has been dealing with the tragic death of her mother all her life, but I mean, the atmosphere of this book really makes up for like the slow going of this. But I feel like it was perfectly paced because when we get to the end of the book, the reveal, like the big twist, is even better. And oh my god, I loved the twist at the end. And you know, before going into this book, I also thought this was just about a book like the biologists were like picking each other off kind of thing, like Lord of the Flies. But no, it's a bit different from that. A series of truly horrible events and, you know, a trigger warning rape that leads to the event in this book. And like the juicy bits of this book really don't unravel until like the later half of this book, and oh my god. I'm actually super surprised at how much I loved this book, because this is typically a book that I wouldn't reach for. Like, if someone told me, oh, it's really slow paced and it's just kind of, you know, atmospheric, I typically wouldn't have picked it up on and, like, you know, gone for it. But because of where the setting is and how the story unfolded, I ended up just absolutely loving it. And it was probably one of my favorite books this month. Next to The Lost City of the Monkey God. I also liked quite a few of the characters in this book. I mean, the main character was fine, but I really liked some of the other biologists in this book, especially the older biologist in the book that's kind of like a shark researcher. His name was Shaelene. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyways, he was like my favorite character in the entire book. I really liked him. But yeah, originally after I got done reading it, I rated it a 3.5 star on Goodreads, but it's one of those books that, you know, if I wait a while, sometimes my feelings about it change, and it's just one of those instances where I waited a while and I love it even more after the fact that I've read it. So this is probably like a 4.5 star. Like, it was really good. I really enjoyed this one. So the next book I read was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I've seen many mixed opinions and feelings about this book, but the premise of this book is just so cool. This is basically like a dinner party murder mystery, except one guy inhabits the body of multiple guests, and he has to figure out who kills Evelyn Hardcastle. And yeah, this has been compared to like Agatha Christie and Groundhog Day, which I don't know what Groundhog Day is about. One thing I will say about this book is that it can get so confusing because there are so many characters in this book, and because this guy just pops up, you know, he falls asleep and then he wakes up, he's probably inhabiting a different body, and then he's in a different body, and then he's alternating days. Like, say he wakes up in the butler and it's like day 2, and then he falls asleep, and then he wakes up on like day 4 in some other guy. So it goes all over the place, and it's like alternating back and forth between days. Once you kind of get the hang of it and it becomes less confusing, that it can become good. So yeah, I was confused for like the first 150 to 200 pages because I was still trying to figure out what exactly was happening and where he was kind of in the story and what was going on. So I was confused for a bit of the book, but it got less confusing. And I will say that this book is kind of complex, and it is hard to follow all the characters. Like, I think if there was less characters, it would have been easier to follow. But I think overall, the story, I found it really good. So much more to that little picture when you go into this book thinking that, oh, it's just solving a murder. Nope, there's a bigger picture to this, and there's like plague doctors and like creepy people, and it was really good. I actually did predict the major twist in this book. It was enjoyable, it was atmospheric, it was twisty, it was a good like dinner party kind of murder mystery, and I think this is definitely one that I will reread in the future, because I think now that I've read it and I know where the story is going, I think that once I reread it, I could probably appreciate this a lot more, and it will probably make more sense, and I'll probably give it a higher rating then. But for now, my rating's probably like 3.5 to like 4 stars. So yeah, oh, there's food on it. Story of my life. I really enjoyed it. It was pretty good, and I'm excited to see what else this author writes. So the next book I read was an ebook. This is The Sound of Sirens by Minkman. I wasn't planning to read this book at all, but on the day that I decided to read this, it was like really rainy. I didn't feel like picking up a hardback, and I didn't feel like reading a full-length story or starting one at that moment. So this is just like a pretty short book. It's a quick and easy read. So the story centers around the inhabitants of this island and the merfolk that inhabit the waters surrounding the island. The merfolk sing their song and lure the townspeople into the water to devour them. So the currents are the elite people that run the government. They have control over the power grid. They have control over the religion and the education. And then you have the Sky League, who are the native population that have been stripped of their cultural history, and they are not allowed to talk in their native languages. They cannot use the power grid. They cannot go to college or university, and they cannot be friends with a current. So they are quite oppressed on this little island. So much of the story focuses on Enna and her forbidden relationship with a current. Anna and the current Royce have shared a love of music and the tragic loss of their respective mothers to the merfolk. Anna's brother, Stacey, I don't even know how to pronounce that name, is helping to foster a new era for the native Sky League by encouraging them to take back their cultural heritage and their rights, so that they will no longer be treated as literal second-class citizens. I found this book so interesting. I really enjoyed like the kind of, I guess, world building, and the class system was very interesting but also very scary. Felt this blended mythology really nicely along with mermaids and an oppressed society. Like, I thought those pretty cool, but I feel like this book could have been so much better if the main character, Anna, wasn't a teenager. If she was like in her 20s and a little bit more mature, I felt like this book could have been so much better, because I felt Anna was immature and there was definitely some stereotypes with her, and she had a lot of immature thinking and all that, you know, like teenagers do. And that was just kind of annoying. I felt like the story definitely could have been elevated if the character was older. I loved this short little book overall for its uniqueness, the atmosphere, and the folklore kind of culture. I really loved it. So this is actually a series, so I'm going to be continuing with the series. Hopefully I can squeeze it in like in the next few months to read it. So yeah, I ended up giving this a 4-star. Now the end of the month, and I have read both of the books that I set out to read. So first we're going to talk about The Devil's Teeth by Susan Casey. I really do like this book, and I mean, I'm pretty sure I said in my March TBR my struggles of reading this book. I'm super proud of myself that, you know, 10 years after I picked up this book and, you know, tried to read it various times, that I finally finished it, and I'm actually very pleased with it. In this book there is a lot of information about shark research that went on in around the Farallon Islands in the earlier days. This is like 2000 to 2004 is when this book, the events in this book are basically taking place. You also get quite a, I guess, shortened version of the history of the Farallon Islands, which is nice because Farallon Islands is they're just a creepy, weird, and very wild place. So it was nice to have that there history. But yeah, the shark research that went on around the Farallon Islands in this book was very insightful, because in a lot of ways it was like this is where shark research pretty much began, and where a lot of innovative things took place, and where a lot of shark behaviors that were not known to science were observed from the great whites. So I think if you're really into sharks and marine biology, you would really like this book. The writing in this book is actually pretty good. Susan Casey's actually a writer for Time magazine. There's one part in the book that really annoyed me. This is gonna be a spoiler. I don't think many of you are gonna read this. They charter a boat from this here guy, and the boat is pretty much falling apart. Like, the electrical system is pretty iffy. There's like stuff going on with the sewage system and the plumbing. There's like this weird goop backing up into the shower and into the sink, which could be a mix of gasoline and sewage, and it's like really disgusting. So the boat's falling apart, and then you have Susan Casey, who honestly is a self-admitted disaster around anything boats. And yet she's left on this here, you know, 60-foot boat, and probably one of the most dangerous places you can be with a boat on the western coast of North America. So obviously things don't go as planned. There's like a huge storm that hits, and they pretty much like lose the boat. She has a hell of a bad time on that boat. So yeah, that's just, it made no sense, because when they chartered the boat, they didn't take a tour of the boat to make sure that everything was working. Like the fridge, she bought like $1,000 worth of groceries and had to give most of the groceries to the researchers on the Farallons because the fridge broke down. So it was very poorly planned, and as a result, one of the shark researchers, I think it was Peter Ply, he ended up being fired from his position because she wasn't allowed to set foot on the island, although she had to come to shore many times, and also because they subsequently lost this guy's boat, which they later recovered, but like, you know. So yeah, I really liked it. I think I rated it like 4.5 to almost 5 stars. I can't really remember. But yeah, it's a really good book. It's definitely one I would definitely read again. I think with nonfiction, you can just read it over and over again. I love it. So the next book that I finished reading is my last book of the month, and I finished it at like 3 o'clock in the morning on the first day of April, but I'm including it as being read in March But basically, I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This has been such a hyped up book on BookTube, Bookstagram, Twitter, like everywhere. And I totally get why. This is truly an amazing book. I'm pretty much at a loss for words on like how to describe this book. I mean, you guys probably all have heard about it by now, so you know the plot. But I cried like 3 or 4 times reading this book. It was so hard-hitting and emotional, and the things Star had to deal with, and then the police officer, you know, killing her best friend, her having to witness that, and like getting no justice, even though it's very obvious that there was, you know, the officer judged Khalil based on his skin color. It was just, oh my god. And then this book just, it doesn't just deal with his shooting, but it deals with like a lot of cultural things that black people have to deal with on a daily basis, with friends, you know, how Star is in like 2 separate worlds. She goes to a richer school while living in a poor neighborhood, gang violence, but there's also a lot of police brutality. This was definitely an eye-opening read for me, because I mean, of course, I've read things like news articles and stuff about whenever a black person has been shot by a white police officer, and you know, stuff like that you just see in the news all of the time. And so to read a book like this that is based on the perspective of a 16-year-old girl who witnessed the shooting of her best friend, it was, not only was it eye-opening, but it was just hard-hitting, it was frustrating, it was so many emotions. I think this actually has to be one of my favorite YA books, and I have a weird relationship with YA books. I want to read them, I like the premise, but sometimes I feel like I've outgrown them, or I just don't really relate to them that much. Maybe it's because I never went to high school, but like, you know, like with YA, it's always kind of iffy with me, but with this book, I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed it for dealing with such difficult topics that are hard to deal with, and it was a good book, and I recommend for a lot of people to read this, especially if you're American, because like, wow. Yeah, I watched the movie afterwards, and I have to say, the movie is really good, but it's like, it's not as good as the book. So yeah, I gave this book a 5-star, obviously. Hi friends, so I completely forgot to mention in this video that I started reading a book and DNF'd it. So if you saw in my, I'm pretty sure it was my March TBR, that I had planned to read Robinson Crusoe. Unfortunately, Robin Caruso was just not for me. One of the biggest reasons why I wanted to read this book is because there was a show on, I think, Fox a few years back, like, I don't know, oh god, it must be more than a few years now. It was probably about 10 years back. My mom and I used to watch this. It was called Robinson Crusoe. I don't even know any of the actors in it. It's been so long. But I really wanted to read it because that was such a great show and I really enjoyed it. So I tried to read this classic, and unfortunately, it's one of those instances where I think, for me, this classic did not age well. The writing in this is just hard to get used to. I found that this story was told kind of like as if someone was just sitting down and, you know, kind of telling a story like I am right now. Like, it was more like, oh, I did this today, and then that, and then that. Like, it's not so much as you're reading a story as so much as a story is being told to you, which is something that I really didn't like, because you read a story, you want to see the events unfold, you don't want to be told that they're unfolding, you know? So that's kind of how it was. I didn't really enjoy it. It was hard to get into. It wasn't, the writing just did not mesh with me. Maybe I'll pick it up in the future, I don't know. I got to like 15% and I DNF'd it. So yeah, that is that. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. Please be sure to check me out on Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter. My links will be in the description below. And I hope to see you guys next time. Bye!